The morning mist clung to the asphalt as Sarah Martinez pulled into the parking lot of Pine Valley Animal Shelter. As the lead animal control officer for the county, she had seen her share of heartbreaking cases, but something about today's call had left her unsettled. A German Shepherd had been found wandering the outskirts of town, severely malnourished and bearing signs of prolonged abuse. The dog had been brought in 3 days ago, and despite the staff's best efforts, he remained withdrawn and terrified of human contact. Sarah pushed through the shelter's front doors, the familiar scent of disinfectant and animal bedding filling her nostrils. The morning cacophony of barking dogs and meowing cats created a symphony she had grown accustomed to over her 15 years in animal welfare. Ginny, the shelter's volunteer coordinator, looked up from her clipboard with tired eyes. "He's still not eating much," Ginny said without preamble, knowing exactly why Sarah had come in early. Dr. Peterson examined him again yesterday. The scarring on his back legs suggests he was kept chained for extended periods. The poor thing flinches every time someone approaches his kennel. Sarah nodded grimly. She had photographed the evidence when the dog first arrived. The raw patches where a too-tight collar had rubbed, the overgrown nails that spoke of confinement, the way his ribs showed through his dull coat. Someone had systematically neglected and abused this animal, and it made her blood boil. "Any leads on where he came from?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "Nothing concrete. A jogger found him near the old industrial district, but you know how it is out there. Half the buildings are abandoned, and the other half house people who don't want to talk to authorities." Sarah made her way to the back kennels, her footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. The German Shepherd occupied kennel number 12, a corner unit that offered him views of both the exercise yard and the main corridor. When Sarah approached, the dog immediately retreated to the far corner of his enclosure, his amber eyes tracking her every movement. "Hey there, big guy," she said softly, crouching down to make herself less threatening. "I know you've been through hell, but you're safe now." The dog's ears twitched at the sound of her voice, but he remained pressed against the back wall. Sarah had worked with traumatized animals before, and she recognized the signs of deep psychological damage. This wasn't just fear of humans. This was learned helplessness born from prolonged suffering. Over the next hour, Sarah sat quietly outside the kennel, occasionally speaking in low, soothing tones. The dog, whom the staff had named Atlas due to his impressive size despite his malnourished state, gradually began to show signs of curiosity. His ears would perk up when Sarah spoke, and once she caught him taking a tentative step forward before retreating again. Dr. Peterson, the shelter's veterinarian, joined Sarah during her vigil. A woman in her 60s with silver hair and gentle hands, she had been treating abused animals longer than anyone at the facility. "His physical wounds are healing well," she reported, consulting her notes. "But the psychological trauma runs deep. I've seen cases like this before. Sometimes they never fully recover their trust in humans. But sometimes they do," Sarah replied, her voice carrying the weight of hope and determination that had sustained her through countless difficult cases. As if responding to her words, Atlas took another step forward, his nose twitching as he caught Sarah's scent. For a moment, their eyes met through the chain-link fencing, and Sarah felt a spark of connection. The breakthrough came on day 6 of Atlas's stay at the shelter. Sarah had been visiting him twice daily, gradually building trust through patience and consistency. She had started bringing small treats, leaving them just inside the kennel door and backing away to give him space. Today, for the first time, Atlas approached the front of his enclosure while she was still present. "That's it, boy," she whispered, her heart racing with excitement. "You're remembering what it's like to trust." Atlas sniffed the air between them, his tail giving the slightest wag. It was a small gesture, but to Sarah, it represented a monumental victory. She reached slowly into her pocket and withdrew a piece of dried chicken, placing it on the ground just outside the kennel. The dog's internal struggle was visible in his body language, his desire for the treat warred with his learned fear of humans. After several long minutes, he stretched his neck through the gap at the bottom of the kennel door, his tongue darting out to snatch the morsel before quickly retreating. "Good boy, Atlas," Sarah praised, her voice thick with emotion. "You're so brave." That evening, Sarah stayed late at the shelter, something that had become routine since Atlas's arrival. She was updating his file when she heard an unusual sound from the kennel area. It was a low whining, different from the typical sounds of distressed animals. She grabbed a flashlight and made her way to the back of the building. Atlas was pacing in his kennel, his agitation obvious even in the dim lighting. When he saw Sarah, his whining intensified, and he began pawing at the kennel door. This was completely out of character for the typically withdrawn dog. What is it, boy? Sarah asked, approaching his enclosure. What's wrong? Atlas's behavior became more frantic. He would run to the back corner of his kennel, then return to the door, looking directly at Sarah as if trying to communicate something urgent. His amber eyes held an intelligence that she had glimpsed before but never seen so clearly displayed. Sarah's instincts, honed by years of working with animals, told her that something was seriously wrong. Atlas wasn't displaying random anxiety. His behavior was purposeful, directed. She made a decision that would later prove to be life-changing. Okay, Atlas, she said, reaching for the kennel latch. I'm going to trust you, and I hope you'll trust me. The moment the kennel door opened, Atlas bolted past her, but instead of running toward the exit as she had feared, he stopped at the shelter's rear door and began scratching at it frantically. His message was clear. He wanted out, and he wanted Sarah to follow. Sarah hesitated for only a moment before clipping a leash to Atlas's collar and opening the door. The night air was cool and crisp, filled with the sounds of distant traffic and chirping crickets. Atlas immediately began pulling her toward the parking lot, his entire body language having transformed from fearful to determined. Where are we going, boy? She asked, but Atlas was already leading her toward her vehicle. The drive through the darkened streets was surreal. Atlas sat in the passenger seat, his nose pressed against the window, occasionally whining to indicate direction changes. Sarah found herself following his guidance, turning left when he became agitated at intersections, continuing straight when he remained calm. They were heading toward the industrial district where he had originally been found. The area was a maze of abandoned warehouses and empty lots, punctuated by the occasional occupied building with flickering neon signs advertising auto repair or discount groceries. Street lighting was sparse, casting long shadows that seemed to shift and dance in the night breeze. Atlas's agitation increased as they drove deeper into the district. He began panting heavily, his claws scratching against the car's interior as he struggled to contain his urgency. When they reached a particularly desolate stretch of road lined with abandoned factories, he began barking frantically. Sarah pulled over and got out of the car, her heart pounding with a mixture of adrenaline and apprehension. Atlas immediately began pulling her toward a building that looked like it had been vacant for decades. The windows were boarded up, and weeds grew through cracks in the concrete foundation. This is it, isn't it? She whispered to Atlas. This is where you came from. The dog's response was to pull her around to the side of the building, where a basement entrance was partially hidden by overgrown vegetation. The metal door hung slightly ajar, and even from several feet away, Sarah could detect an unpleasant odor emanating from within. Sarah pulled out her cell phone and called the police, explaining her location and the circumstances that had brought her there. While waiting for backup, she noticed Atlas's behavior had changed again. The frantic energy had been replaced by a focused alertness, as if he were listening for something specific. That's when she heard it, a faint whimpering sound coming from inside the basement. It wasn't the cry of an animal, it was unmistakably human. Officer Mike Rodriguez arrived within 10 minutes, followed closely by 2 additional patrol cars. Sarah quickly explained the situation, gesturing toward the basement entrance where Atlas remained stationed, his ears perked forward in rapt attention. You're telling me this dog led you here? Rodriguez asked, skepticism evident in his voice. I know how it sounds, Sarah replied, but I've been working with traumatized animals for 15 years. Atlas was trying to tell me something, and this is where he brought me. The whimpering sound came again, clearer now and definitely human. Rodriguez's expression changed immediately. He radioed for additional backup and emergency medical services before approaching the basement door with his weapon drawn. Police. Is anyone down there? The response was immediate, a weak voice calling for help. Rodriguez and his partners carefully descended into the basement, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. What they found would haunt them for years to come. The basement had been converted into a makeshift prison. 3 small rooms had been constructed with crude wooden walls and padlocked doors. In 2 of the rooms, they found children, a girl who appeared to be around 8 years old and a boy who couldn't have been more than 6. Both were malnourished and terrified, but alive. The 3rd room was empty, but the chain and collar found inside told a story that made Sarah's heart ache. This had been Atlas's prison, and somehow, he had escaped and survived long enough to lead rescuers back to save the children who remained trapped. As paramedics attended to the rescued children, Sarah knelt beside Atlas in the basement. The dog was trembling, overwhelmed by returning to the site of his trauma, but he had not wavered in his mission. He had endured his own fear to save others. You're a hero, she whispered to him, her voice breaking with emotion. You saved them. The investigation that followed revealed the full scope of the horror that had taken place in that basement. The property owner, a man named Marcus Webb, had been using the location to hold kidnapped children for ransom. Atlas had been kept as a guard dog, but his gentle nature had made him unsuitable for the role. Instead of being an asset, he had become another victim of Webb's cruelty. Webb was arrested at his home 3 hours later, caught trying to flee with a suitcase full of cash and fake identification documents. The children, identified as siblings who had been missing for 2 months, were reunited with their frantic parents. The story of Atlas's heroic rescue made national news. Donations poured into Pine Valley Animal Shelter from around the country, and adoption applications for Atlas numbered in the hundreds. But Sarah had already made her decision about his future. The adoption paperwork was finalized on a sunny Tuesday morning 2 weeks after the rescue. Atlas, now healthy and beginning to show signs of his true personality, walked confidently beside Sarah as they left the shelter together. His coat had regained its luster, and his eyes held a spark of joy that had been absent when he first arrived. Sarah's house had a large fenced yard and a comfortable dog bed positioned near the window where Atlas could watch the world go by. But more importantly, it offered him something he had never truly experienced, a home filled with love and security. In the months that followed, Atlas continued to amaze everyone who met him. His intelligence and intuition seemed almost supernatural. He had an uncanny ability to sense when people were in distress, and he would often approach them with gentle comfort. Sarah began bringing him to work occasionally, where he helped calm other traumatized animals arriving at the shelter. The children Atlas had saved, Emma and Joshua, visited him regularly. Their parents credited the dog with giving them back their most precious gifts, and the bond between the children and Atlas was immediate and profound. Emma, the older of the two, would often whisper secrets in his ear, and Atlas would listen with the patience of a saint. Dr. Peterson marveled at Atlas's transformation. "I've never seen such a complete recovery from severe trauma," she told Sarah during one of their regular checkups. "It's as if saving those children gave him a purpose that helped him heal." Sarah agreed. She had witnessed the power of purpose in her work with animals before, but never to this extent. Atlas had not only overcome his own trauma but had transformed it into something meaningful. His suffering had not been in vain. It had prepared him to save others. One evening, as Sarah sat in her living room with Atlas resting his head on her lap, she reflected on the series of events that had brought them together. The dog who had been so broken and afraid had found the courage to trust again, not just for his own sake, but to save innocent lives. "You know what I think?" she said to Atlas, scratching behind his ears in the way that made his tail wag. "I think you were meant to find your way to that shelter. Not just to be rescued, but to become a rescuer yourself." Atlas looked up at her with those intelligent amber eyes, and Sarah could swear she saw understanding there. He had been through hell and emerged not bitter or broken, but compassionate and brave. He had taken the worst of human cruelty and responded with the best of canine loyalty. The story of Atlas became a symbol of hope for the animal welfare community and beyond. It demonstrated the resilience of the spirit, both human and animal, and the power of trust to overcome even the deepest trauma. Children who heard the story were inspired to be brave in their own challenges, and adults were reminded of the importance of listening to those who cannot speak for themselves. Sarah often told people that she had rescued Atlas, but she knew the truth was more complex. In many ways, Atlas had rescued her too. He had reminded her why she had chosen her profession, renewed her faith in the possibility of healing, and shown her that even in the darkest circumstances, hope could survive and flourish. Years later, Atlas would live a long and happy life, surrounded by love and purpose. He never forgot his past, but he was no longer defined by it. Instead, he became defined by his courage, his compassion, and his unwavering belief in the goodness that could exist between humans and animals. The basement where he had been imprisoned was demolished, and in its place, the city built a small park with a memorial plaque honoring all victims of abuse. But the real memorial to Atlas's courage lived on in the lives he had saved and the hearts he had touched, proving that sometimes the most broken among us can become the strongest, and that love truly can conquer even the darkest evil.